They told her to strip, laughed as they circled her. One of them whistled low. Another pulled out his phone, pretending to check the time, but everyone knew what he was really doing. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She just unzipped her jumpsuit, turned her back, and let the silence take care of the rest. Because on her spine was something no one could explain, a symbol no one was supposed to have, a code no one was supposed to remember. And suddenly, all their laughter died. Before I tell you what the tattoo meant, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Because after this, you might never look at the quiet ones the same again. The sun hammered down on West Wind Base like a vengeful god, turning the concrete runway into a shimmering mirage of distorted air and broken dreams. Dust particles danced in the scorching breeze, coating everything in a fine layer of desert grit that spoke of endless, unforgiving days. Sweat pooled beneath every collar, every helmet, every piece of gear that touched human skin. This was the kind of oppressive heat that didn't just bake steel until it warped and twisted. It melted the very patience right out of a person's soul, leaving behind nothing but raw nerves and shortened tempers. And then, like something out of a fever dream, she walked into their world. She didn't make a grand entrance in some armored Humvee with its engine roaring defiance at the desert. There was no dramatic helicopter descent with rotors chopping through the superheated air. Instead, she arrived in the most unremarkable way possible, stepping out of a simple military transport truck and had clearly seen better decades. The vehicle wheezed and rattled down the dusty access road like an old warrior limping home from too many forgotten battles. Its paint faded and its metal scarred by countless desert miles. Out stepped a woman who seemed to exist in stark contrast to everything around her. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight, military regulation braid that spoke of discipline and attention to detail. Her face was clean of makeup, stripped of any pretense or vanity, revealing features that were both striking and somehow achingly vulnerable. She wore a standard-issue jumpsuit that hung loose on her slender frame, as if the military had forgotten that not everyone who served came in the same size. In her hands, she carried the tools of her trade with quiet reverence. A clipboard that looked like it had been through its own war, and a small canvas tool bag whose grease-stained handles told stories of countless hours spent in the belly of machines that most people would never understand. To the hardened maintenance crew watching her approach, she looked like someone's innocent little sister who had somehow wandered onto a military installation by mistake. Too pretty for this harsh world of oil and metal, too soft for the brutal realities of military life, too delicate to belong on a tarmac where million-dollar aircraft lived and died by the skill of the people who maintained them. Corporal Devon, a man whose cynicism had been forged in the fires of too many deployments, couldn't resist the opportunity to display his wit. He nudged his buddy with an elbow, sharpened by years of military sarcasm, and let a knowing smirk spread across his weathered face. "Guess they're letting in interns now," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume to ensure she could hear every word of his casual dismissal. But she didn't flinch. She didn't blush, or stammer, or give them the satisfaction of seeing her confidence crack. Instead, she moved with the kind of purposeful grace that only comes from someone who knows exactly why they're there. She checked the tail numbers on the Black Hawk helicopter sitting in Hangar 3 like she was reading a familiar book, then turned toward the duty sergeant with the kind of quiet authority that made strong men pause and reconsider their assumptions. "Structural inspection," she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Routine cross-check from engineering command." The sergeant, a man who had seen enough surprises in his career to know when something didn't quite fit the usual pattern, raised an eyebrow that had been scarred by shrapnel years ago. "Where's your supervisor?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Without hesitation, she handed him her clearance papers. Level 5 authorization, marked urgent in bold red letters, signed by someone whose name carried enough weight to make colonels nervous, and whose authority reached into places that most people on base could only imagine. Still, the sergeant hesitated, because pretty girls with perfect military posture and eyes that seemed to hold secrets didn't usually carry clearance that could open doors most people didn't even know existed. But she didn't argue with his hesitation. She didn't demand respect or throw around the weight of her mysterious authorization. She just waited, standing there in the merciless heat like someone who had grown accustomed to being underestimated. Someone who understood that patience was often the most powerful weapon of all. Something shifted in the air of that hangar, something darker than the shadows cast by the massive aircraft looming overhead. Corporal Devon felt it too, that subtle change in atmospheric pressure that happens when a predator decides to test its prey. Maybe it was wounded pride gnawing at him like acid, the sting of being ignored by someone who should have been intimidated by his rank and his presence. Maybe it was the crushing boredom of another identical day in this desert hell, where the only entertainment came from breaking someone else's spirit. Or maybe it was something deeper, something more primitive and ugly, triggered by the way she had looked right through him as if he was nothing more than another piece of equipment cluttering up the hangar floor. Whatever it was, it made him step forward with the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the sweet anticipation of watching someone crack under pressure. "You here to fix something, sweetheart?" The words dripped from his lips like honey laced with cyanide, each syllable carefully crafted to remind her that in his world, she was nothing more than an outsider playing dress-up in a uniform she hadn't earned. She turned to face him with movements that were economical and precise, her blue eyes meeting his with the kind of steady gaze that should have been a warning to anyone smart enough to read the signs. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had marked her exchange with the sergeant. "Unless that's a problem for you." The response hit the gathered mechanics like a spark hitting gasoline. Laughter erupted from the crowd, sharp and encouraging, the kind of sound that turns ordinary men into a pack of hyenas sensing weakness. One of them actually applauded, his calloused hands clapping together in mock appreciation for the show that was about to unfold. Another voice cut through the noise with gleeful malice. "She talks back. You gonna let that slide, Dev?" And that was all the invitation Devon needed to lean into the darkness that had been building inside him since she walked through those hangar doors. He began to circle her like a vulture that had spotted something dying in the desert sun, his boots clicking against the concrete floor with deliberate menace. Each step was calculated to intimidate, to remind her that she was surrounded by men who didn't particularly care about her level 5 clearance or her mysterious authorization. He peered into her canvas tool bag like he had every right in the world to examine her equipment, his fingers hovering just close enough to her personal space to make his intentions clear without quite crossing the line that would get him court-martialed. And then, like a man who had just discovered the perfect weapon, he smiled. "We've got new electronic security protocols," he announced, his voice carrying the false authority of someone who had just invented a rule to suit his purposes. "No unauthorized gear near avionics. That includes hidden transmitters, recording devices, or personal electronics of any kind." She blinked once, a slow, deliberate movement that might have been patience or might have been something far more dangerous. She waited, standing perfectly still in the center of that hostile circle, as if she understood that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. "I'm gonna need to inspect your uniform," Devon added, his smile widening as he savored the moment. Top to bottom, standard compliance check. Everyone in that hangar knew it wasn't standard. The real protocols were written down in manuals that none of them had bothered to read in years. And nowhere in those dusty pages was there authorization for what Devon was suggesting. But knowledge of the rules and willingness to enforce them were two very different things. And in that moment, surrounded by the smell of aviation fuel and the weight of institutional indifference, no one was willing to be the person who stepped forward to stop what was about to happen. Some of the men watched with the kind of interest that spoke to the darker corners of human nature, their eyes bright with anticipation for a spectacle they knew they shouldn't want to see. Others looked away, their conscience apparently still functional enough to feel shame, but not quite strong enough to inspire action. The hangar filled with the sound of shifting feet and nervous breathing, the collective guilt of witnesses who had chosen complicity over courage. And she, standing there in the center of it all like the eye of a storm that hadn't yet decided whether to destroy everything in its path, just stood there, In that moment, the truth became crystal clear to anyone with eyes to see it. There was no legitimate military order backing up what was happening in that hangar. There was no real authority being exercised, no genuine security protocol being followed. Just a room full of boys who had been handed uniforms and weapons and told they were soldiers, now playing a game they didn't understand with stakes they couldn't comprehend. She understood this better than any of them. Without a word of protest or a single gesture of defiance, she placed her clipboard on the nearby workbench with the kind of careful precision that spoke of someone who had been trained to treat every action as potentially significant. Her thumbs found the zipper of her jumpsuit, and with movements that were neither rushed nor hesitant, she pulled it down in one smooth motion that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent hangar. The air itself seemed to transform in that instant. No longer the dry, oppressive heat of a desert military installation, but something charged with electricity, something that made the hair on the back of every man's neck stand up as if lightning was about to strike. The atmosphere grew thick with tension that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the sense that they were all witnessing something that would change everything they thought they knew. Underneath the utilitarian jumpsuit, she wore a simple gray t-shirt that had seen better days, its fabric soft and faded from countless washings. There were no logos to identify her allegiance, no body armor to suggest she expected violence, no hidden pockets or suspicious bulges that might conceal weapons or surveillance equipment. Just a thin, worn shirt that hung loose on her frame and regulation black undergarments that spoke of someone who followed military protocol even in the smallest details. The inspection that Devon had demanded revealed exactly what he had claimed to be looking for. No devices of any kind, no wires or transmitters or recording equipment, nothing hidden in her clothing or strapped to her body. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a young woman with a clipboard and a tool bag, standing in a military hangar wearing nothing more threatening than cotton and determination. Except for one thing. "Turn around," Devon commanded, his voice still carrying that cocky edge of someone who believed he was in complete control of the situation, someone who thought he had successfully reduced another human being to the status of an object to be examined and dismissed. And she did turn around, not with the reluctance of someone who had been humiliated, but with the fluid grace of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Someone who understood that sometimes you have to let people think they're winning before you show them how wrong they are. The gray fabric of her t-shirt clung to her back like a second skin, and there, rising up from her waistband to stretch across her shoulder blades like a dark constellation against pale skin, was something that no one in that hangar had expected to see. A black tattoo, etched with the kind of surgical precision that spoke of military medical facilities and security clearances that most people couldn't even imagine. The design was stark and unmistakable, a geometric triangle that seemed to pulse with its own dark energy, accompanied by a string of numbers that looked like coordinates or codes or something far more sinister. And dominating it all, a bird of prey rendered in intricate detail, its wings stretched wide as if ready to take flight, its claws drawn and ready to strike. It wasn't a decoration chosen for its beauty or its meaning to the person who wore it. It wasn't the kind of tattoo that young people got to mark a milestone or express their personality or show their allegiance to a cause they believed in. It was a warning, carved into human flesh by people who understood that some messages are too important to trust to words alone. Colonel Ray Donovan had been a soldier for 23 years, long enough to develop the kind of confident stride that spoke of a man who had earned every star on his collar and every ribbon on his chest through blood, sweat, and the kind of decisions that haunted you in the quiet hours before dawn. He entered that hangar with two senior officers flanking him like bodyguards, their polished boots clicking against the concrete in perfect synchronization as he discussed fuel allocations with the kind of casual authority that comes from commanding men and machines worth more than most small countries' entire military budgets. He was mid-sentence, something about helicopter maintenance schedules and supply chain logistics, when his eyes found her standing there in the center of that hostile circle, her back turned toward him like an invitation to witness something that would change everything he thought he knew about the world. And in that instant, time seemed to fracture around him. He stopped walking as if he had hit an invisible wall. The words died in his throat, cutting off his sentence so abruptly that his officers exchanged worried glances. He stopped breathing, his chest frozen in the middle of an inhale as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were telling him. The folder in his hand, filled with routine paperwork and mundane military correspondence, slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers and hit the concrete with a slap that echoed through the hangar like a gunshot. He stared at the girl, this young woman who had seemed like nothing more than another minor disruption in his perfectly ordered military world. He stared at her back, at the gray fabric clinging to her spine like a shroud. But most of all, he stared at the ink that decorated her skin like a message written in a language that only a handful of people on Earth could read. His men followed his gaze, their heads turning in unison to look at what had captured their commanding officer's attention so completely. Then they looked back at him, searching his face for some explanation for the sudden change in his demeanor, for the way all the color had drained from his weathered features. "Sir," one of them whispered, the word barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning system and the distant sound of aircraft engines warming up on the tarmac. But Colonel Donovan couldn't answer, because his mind was racing through classified files and redacted reports, through memories that had been sealed away in the deepest vaults of military intelligence. He recognized the triangle, that stark geometric symbol that belonged to a unit that didn't officially exist. A unit buried so deep in the Black Ops hierarchy that even Joint Command couldn't trace its operations or access its personnel files. It was the kind of symbol that appeared in documents with security clearances so high that reading them without authorization was considered treason. The numbers etched beneath the triangle weren't random digits or meaningless decoration. They were coordinates, burned into his memory from briefings that had never officially happened about missions that were never supposed to be discussed. Afghanistan, 2012. A location in the Hindu Kush Mountains where something had gone terribly wrong, where an operation had been launched that never made it into any official files, never appeared in any after-action reports, never existed in any database that Congress or the press or even most generals could access. And the bird of prey that dominated the tattoo, that magnificent predator with its wings stretched wide and its claws drawn for combat, that wasn't just artistic flourish or personal symbolism. In the shadowy world of special operations, that bird marked one thing and one thing only, a designation that sent chills down the spine of anyone who understood its meaning: returned alone. The tattoo wasn't something chosen from a parlor wall or designed by an artist looking to make a statement. It was government issue, applied in sterile medical facilities by people with security clearances higher than most cabinet members. But it was only given to those who had been lost, who had disappeared into the kind of darkness that swallows people whole and never gives them back. It was reserved for those who had been written off as casualties, mourned in secret ceremonies, and then somehow, impossibly, came back by force. Colonel Donovan didn't shout orders or raise his voice in anger. He didn't panic or call for backup or reach for his sidearm. Instead, he simply stepped forward with the kind of quiet authority that only comes from a man who has commanded respect in the most dangerous places on Earth, and said one thing that would change everything. "Stand down." The words echoed through the hangar like a divine commandment, bouncing off the concrete walls and the massive aircraft frames with the kind of finality that brooks no argument. They carried the weight of decades of military service, of battles fought and won, of men saved and lost under his command. Corporal Devon flinched as if he had been physically slapped, his cocky confidence evaporating like water on hot asphalt. He tried to stammer out some kind of response, some explanation that might salvage what was left of his rapidly crumbling position, but it was already too late. The game was over before he even understood what game he had been playing. She turned back around with movements that were calm, precise, and utterly dignified. There was no hurry in her actions, no sense of shame or humiliation. She reached for the zipper of her jumpsuit and pulled it up with the kind of deliberate grace that comes from someone who has survived far worse than this moment. Someone who understood that dignity is not something that can be taken from you, only something you can choose to give away. not in anger, because anger would have suggested that what had just happened mattered to her, not in shame, because shame would have meant accepting their judgment of her worth, but with the kind of quiet strength that speaks of someone who has walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but transformed. One of the privates still held his phone up, his face pale with the sudden realization that he might have just documented something that could end his career. "Should I delete the recording?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You will do so," Donovan said, his eyes locking onto the young soldier with the intensity of a laser sight. "Or I'll see to it personally that you never hold a security clearance again, in any capacity, for any reason, ever." The phone vanished into a pocket faster than a magic trick. Devon tried to speak, tried to explain himself, tried to justify what had just happened. But Colonel Donovan didn't even look at him. Instead, he turned to her with the kind of respect reserved for heroes and legends. "Ma'am," he said, snapping to attention and delivering a full military salute. "Is there anything you need to complete your assignment?" She didn't answer right away, just picked up her clipboard from the workbench where she had placed it what felt like a lifetime ago. "I'd like to finish my inspection now." He nodded with the gravity of someone who understood exactly what that meant, and no one stopped her again. She moved through that hangar like someone who had been born for this moment, her hands flowing over the aircraft with the kind of intuitive grace that can't be taught in any technical school or military academy. She ran her fingers along the rotor blades with the delicate touch of a pianist caressing ivory keys, feeling for vibrations and imperfections that lesser mechanics might miss entirely. Her eyes tracked over the control panels with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient, checking connections and readings with the kind of focused attention that comes from knowing that lives depend on getting every detail exactly right. She tapped bolts with subtle force, listening for the telltale sounds that would reveal their secrets, her ear attuned to frequencies that spoke of metal fatigue and structural integrity. Each movement was economical and precise, the result of training that had been paid for with blood and measured in the kind of experience that most people pray they never have to acquire. Within 10 seconds, she had found a critical misalignment in the rotor assembly that the base's sophisticated computer diagnostic systems had somehow missed for an entire month. Her fingers traced the problem area with the certainty of someone who had seen this exact failure before, probably in circumstances where discovering it too late would have meant death for everyone aboard. She caught a loose seal in the hydraulic system that could have caused catastrophic mid-air failure, the kind of mechanical betrayal that turns routine missions into smoking craters in the desert. She didn't brag about her discoveries or lecture the maintenance crew about their oversights. She didn't scold them for missing problems that could have killed people or destroyed millions of dollars worth of equipment. She simply wrote down her findings on her clipboard with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else, then moved on to the next system that needed her attention. Within an hour, word had spread through the base like wildfire. Other sergeants began showing up to observe this mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere and immediately demonstrated skills that surpassed their most experienced technicians. The whispers began in hushed tones, spreading from hangar to hangar like a virus of curiosity and amazement. "She's not just a mechanic," someone said, their voice filled with the kind of awe usually reserved for witnessing miracles. "She fixed something blindfolded that we've been working on for weeks. I think she outranks everyone on this whole base," another added, the words carrying the weight of someone who had just realized they were in the presence of something far beyond their understanding. But she never corrected anyone's speculation or satisfied their curiosity. She never explained the meaning of the tattoo that had transformed her from victim to legend in the span of a single afternoon. She never said where she had come from or where she would go when her work here was finished, maintaining the kind of mysterious silence that only made the questions multiply. Only one man found the nerve to ask the question that was burning in everyone's mind. "You ever served, ma'am?" he asked, his voice respectful but hungry for answers that might help him understand what he had just witnessed. She looked at him with that same calm expression she had worn throughout the entire ordeal, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips as she delivered an answer that was both everything and nothing at all. "Somewhere cold, Somewhere hot, somewhere gone. By sundown, the hangar had changed. No more whistles, no more jokes. Devin sat outside alone on the steps, face pale, career broken. Rodriguez joined him in the twilight. "You know what you did today?" Rodriguez asked. Devin nodded. "I thought she was nothing." Rodriguez looked out at the flight line. "My uncle served in Black Ops. Told me the quiet ones are always the ones who carry the weight. If they've got a tattoo, no one can explain. You don't ask. You just say thank you." Inside, the woman packed up her tools and left the log sheet on the desk. Donovan walked her to the gate himself. "You don't have to come back here," he said. "I can make sure you get assignments with less risk." She looked out at the horizon where the sun was dipping low behind the airstrip, pilots doing pre-flight checks, crews laughing near the fuel trucks. "I'll be back next month," she said. "Why?" She turned to face him, and for the first time all day, there was something more than calm professionalism in her expression. "Because someone has to teach these kids that the quiet ones aren't weak. They're just used to fighting battles no one ever sees." Have you ever watched someone be mocked for staying silent, only to realize, too late, they were the strongest in the room? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about the invisible giants who walk among us. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to say a word.